Please welcome to the stage Martin Nisenholtz, joined by Jonah Peretti, Chief Executive Officer of BuzzFeed.
Thank you. So we have Jonah Peretti, who, in addition to being the founder and CEO of BuzzFeed, was a co-founder at Huffington Post, and kind of puts a bookend on that part of the discussion that we listened to this morning. So, you know, along those lines, you know, you were a bit invisible at Huffington Post. I mean, Ariana got all of the kind of bright light in that business. But I think you're sort of widely credited with being a major factor in the growth of the site during its early years. What did you learn about, you know, virality and building distribution, particularly as it might apply to some of the marketing folks in the room, that you've taken over to BuzzFeed?
Yeah, I was always obsessed with this idea of why things spread. How does an idea go from one person to millions of people, and kind of had these accidental experiments in my early career where I made things that spread to millions of people, and they would always rise and crash. And so for me, Huffington Post was very interesting as an experiment of, can you make something that constantly has new things, like a platform for launching new content that goes viral and then crashes, but there's another thing there, and then another thing and another thing, and you can grow and build something that's big. So for me, that was one of the really fascinating things about Huffington Post was, can you take some of these things that you were seeing happening in the web in like late 90s and 2000 with like some kid made something in his basement, it spreads to millions of people, and can you use some of those same distribution techniques to create a big site? And we were able to do that at Huffington Post. And it was, you know, pretty exciting for me that every time we do a new thing, we'd have a bigger audience to start it with, and so each time things could get bigger and bigger.
And you've done it again at BuzzFeed. I mean, you've got about 10 million uniques now, roughly.
So yeah, the ComScore uniques were over 10 million, and around 30 for Google Analytics. And what has been nice about BuzzFeed is that we've been able to do it almost entirely through social traffic. So when we started Huffington Post, the web really social web really wasn't mature. There were things like email forwards and people posting on message boards, and it was early, you know, blogging was getting a lot of press and attention, but didn't actually send that much traffic to sites, despite all the attention it was getting. And so search was the biggest referring source, and even though I never really loved search, I got obsessed with understanding how Google would send traffic around the web, and Huffington Post got very good at swarming stories and winning the top search results. With BuzzFeed, I got to go back to my first love, which was people sharing content they think is awesome, and build a platform for that. And because Facebook exists, and Twitter and Reddit and StumbleUpon and all of these mature social platforms, you can actually build a big publishing site with social being the predominant form of traffic that you get.
Yeah, along those lines, I mean, the last time we spoke, you talked about a kind of shift. As the founder of nytimes.com, I mean, I tend to think in terms of reading, and you tend to think in terms of sharing, even though the Times website is the most tweeted news source in the world. It was a kind of shift in my thinking to think, oh, well, people aren't necessarily coming to read, they're actually coming to share. Now, obviously, they have to read something in order to share it, but maybe they don't. Can you explain what that means for news design? I mean, maybe they don't need to read it to share it.
Well, sometimes people share things. We have an 11,000 word piece on BuzzFeed today that goes into Mitt Romney's father's history. And there was a lot of people tweeting it saying, didn't read this, but it seems important.
That's great.
And so sometimes people do share having not read. But in general, the wake-up call for me was someone emailed a complaint into BuzzFeed and said, you failed me. There wasn't anything good to share today on BuzzFeed. This was a couple years ago. And I looked at it and I was like, that's strange. Like normally a reader would complain there wasn't a good story for him to read, and here he's complaining there wasn't something to share, and it made me realize that people were seeing the front page of BuzzFeed not the way they see the front page of the Huffington Post and New York Times, which is for them, primarily. They're seeing it as a place to go to share with their friends on Facebook and Twitter. And the network has kind of become self-aware. It used to be that we were all part of this 6 degrees of separation and sharing content, and it reached millions of people and things went viral, but we didn't know we were part of the network. Now everyone knows they're part of this network. And when you share something, you're almost voting to make it popular, and you're aware that you are a publisher and that what you post to Facebook and Twitter matters. And so people are coming to BuzzFeed to find the right thing to share with friends. And we've even seen people say, I don't like the cute kittens, but my wife loves them, and so I go to BuzzFeed to find things to send to my wife, and then she loves me more. And so that's like a very different way of thinking about media.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things that you mentioned, you talked about a prominent venture capitalist basically, really wanting to invest in the business, but just saying, can't you start this thing, or can't you run this thing without actual people? I mean, I think there's always been this tension in, particularly in the social space, between platforms that have very, very few employees but scale to unimaginable heights, and journalism, which is really all about reporting, editing, and larger fixed costs. So can you have it both ways, or is it
Yeah, I mean, we did have venture capitalists in the early days say to us, could the editors not work for you? Could you have them be volunteer contributors or contractors, or could they get a rev share on the advertising or something, so that you can have a company that's entirely engineers, and you could scale the company's tech platform, and you can be an Instagram or Twitter. And I think that what you're seeing now is that even some of these companies that are tech platforms like Tumblr and Twitter and Facebook, they're starting to say, how do we get good content that goes beyond UGC content? And Tumblr's even hiring editors, and you're seeing some of the pure tech platforms starting to realize you can't actually make compelling certain types of compelling content just with a community. That we have people on Romney's plane we have dedicated people following the Obama campaign, the Romney campaign. We have people covering beats. We have tech writers who have expertise about technology and understand how these systems and services work in a deep way, because that's all they do all day long, and they're experts at it.
But I mean, you believe there's a business model underneath of that you can actually create a business with a higher cost model than all engineers.
Well, I think that you hear a story like Instagram, and that's a rare thing, and you're like, that's a pretty good business, 14 people or whatever, $1 billion exit, But with the social web giving new forms of distribution, a really excellent reporter, a really excellent writer, a really excellent creator of entertaining social content can reach millions and millions of people because of the social web, and because things can spread so quickly across Facebook and Twitter and other social platforms. And so that changes the economics. And the really nice thing about it is it changes the economics in favor of top quality work and good journalism and good reporting, because on Google, the Google bot can't tell the difference between a rewrite of the New York Times article and the original New York Times article. The Twitter users can tell the difference. They know that's the real New York Times article, or this is the BuzzFeed scoop that Ben Smith filed that's an original scoop, and the smart people on Twitter know, and they tweet that. And the rewrite or the aggregated piece, Googlebot might pick that up as the #1 thing, but Twitter and Facebook aren't, because humans are better than robots at knowing which content is good.
So do your journalists, the Huffington Post people who were here before really emphasized the use of data and analytics in terms of the way they build their editorial process. And I think that came, at least in part, from you, correct? I mean, that was very early days at the Huffington Post. That just wasn't invented today or yesterday.
Right.
And I assume you've carried that over to BuzzFeed.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we did at Huffington Post was a click meter on the headlines. And that was something that years ago we showed to an audience and said, this is what the front page of Huffington Post looks like to an editor. And it showed little spark lines of what people were clicking, and it allowed the front page editor to move things around. And then that worked so well to make a homepage that people really loved clicking, and where they found interesting stories, that we started to apply that to lots of other parts of Huffington Post, and that's been part of the DNA of that company of developing that. I think when you look at kind of quickly like the history of media, you see that the first wave of online publishing, it was about distribution being quick and easy. Like you could reach anyone in the world without having paper mills and print and trucks and all that. And you could update in real time. And then with Huffington Post, the realization was, oh, you also can see data feedback. So you can be closer to your audience because you know what your audience is doing on the site. And so that became a second thing that the medium of digital allowed people to do. And then now we're seeing that social and sharing is opening up a new sort of thing where we have the data feedback, we have the real-time distribution, of sort of earlier eras of publishing, but we also have a sense of how people are connected to each other and how they're sharing media with each other, and that is opening up new types of distribution.
So I want to shift gears for just a second and get over to the advertising side. You've made some comments about traditional banner advertising, particularly in the context of a setting like BuzzFeed. And I think some of the stuff you've done is very, very brave because it's very hard to build, just bluntly, a new standard in advertising. I think the last time it was done was AdSense. Maybe Facebook has begun to do it as well. But it looks to me, when I look at your website, that the sponsored story is a kind of new standard in a sense. And I'd really like you to kind of explain what it is for people who haven't used the site and haven't seen them. I mean, it was funny, we had the digital marketing person from GE here just a couple of minutes ago, and I saw a sponsored story from GE on the site the other day, kind of looking down from space at these incredible things on Earth, including a Colonel Sanders carved into the desert out in New Mexico or something, which was quite amusing. Did you see that?
Yeah,
it was amazing.
And in the video that Linda showed, there was BuzzFeed posts and this time machine we built with GE.
Okay, how do you think that becomes a standard, Jonah? I mean, obviously it's very interesting as advertising, but it only runs on BuzzFeed at this point.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, you see these waves where people want everything needs to be standardized or no one will buy it, and we were sort of at the tail end of that when BuzzFeed was first thinking about how do we make money, how do we sustain this business, and we resisted doing banners even though they were standard, and everyone was kind of saying, well, they don't really work that well, but it's the standard, so you should just do it, and that's sort of how the industry works, and don't fight it. And we resisted the easy solution, and we went after building native advertising that fit with our site. And I think that one of the things that's going to make standardization trickier this time around is that native advertising really is about making a standard that matches this platform you're on. So the standard for Twitter for native advertising should be a tweet is the advertisement. A standard for Facebook should be the sponsored story that is in stream should be the native unit. And for BuzzFeed, it's a post or a piece of social content or shareable content. And so we really try to use the same platform, the same technology, the same analytics, the headline, thumbnail, description, all the same post formats we use for editorial content, lists, quizzes, different kinds of interactive formats, video, images, making that same exact platform and letting our brands publish to our site in their own channels and in units that are partner units that are that Google yellow color, so there's still very clear church state. But the standard really is it needs to be native, which means it needs to match the platform it's on. And so the same type of sponsored content should look very different if it's on Twitter or on BuzzFeed or.
So, but AdWords became AdSense, right? I mean, it was native to the search index, but then it spread to other content businesses as AdSense. I mean, I look at the sort of standard page design, feed-based page design. Take a site like news.me or something. I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't ultimately create some larger network out of this
that's
stuff.
true, and we've been testing that idea with a few partners, and it's working really well. But even when we test with partners, we need it to fit the partner site. So if it's like difficult. The BuzzFeed color and it's the BuzzFeed this, and you feel like, oh, this is a BuzzFeed post on another site, it doesn't feel quite right. So
well, how large do you think you have to be to get to critical mass with native? I mean, is it 30 million, 50 million, 100 million? I mean, what's the I
don't think there's a set threshold. I mean, I think that we'll do 4 times the revenue this year than we did last year, and we're going to keep growing a lot next year. And I think the possibility to scale it is pretty endless. It's not going to scale the way Instagram scales. It's going to scale through really good execution and hiring and building out a real big organization with lots of creative people and lots of analytical people.
That's exciting, though.
Left brain, right brain, and doing all those things.
So we're almost coming to the end of our time, but I have to go to this quote that I saw about 2 weeks ago. Ray Wirt, who is Gawker's content guy, the guy that Nick Denton hired to kind of curate his form of native advertising, posted on Facebook, quote, "Advertisers are trying to tell a story, and more when it comes to sponsored content, they don't want throwaway LOL ads like those you'll find on BuzzFeed, Facebook, and Twitter. Instead, they want what anyone with a story to tell wants: authenticity and editorial sensibility, something we have a half-decade of history providing brands." It was obviously, a competitive slap. Can you comment on that? I mean, what are throwaway LOL ads?
I think he was trying to make a little jab at us because we've been having so much success working with all these top brands to make great content that gets shared and passed around on Twitter and Facebook, and anytime you're doing great work, people will want to kind of copy what you're doing or denigrate it.
I'm trying to get into the essence of what he means by telling a story versus an LOL ad. I mean, there may be some substantive difference between the two, and I'm not making at all a judgment or a comment about the advertising efficacy. I'm just saying, do you see a difference? Is there a difference between the kind of thing that Gawker is doing and the kind of thing that you're doing?
I'm not sure actually that I don't know that much about what they're doing, but I think that there's a wide range of ways of telling stories, and I think on the social web, emotion is very important. And the reason that we've organized our site initially as LOL, OMG, cute, is that the reason people share things isn't because it's about X, Y, or Z. They usually are sharing things because they're touched by something, they feel something, and in some ways it harkens back to early days of Mad Men era advertising, where the great sort of ad men are creating advertising that makes people have an emotional response, that is great content, that has storytelling in it, and that people consume as content and like enough that they'll share it and pass it on.
Yeah, so the example of Space, I mean, a lot of the images were funny, and they just had an emotional connection. They didn't necessarily have a deep intellectual one.
Yeah, so, and some brands will do sponsored content with us that's more intellectual, that usually will spread on Twitter more, where it's more interest-based, and then some is more emotional, and it will spread on Facebook or on Pinterest. So I think a lot of it is understanding different digital platforms and why people share and what their motivation and psychology is, and that's important for editorial content as well, and for branded content.
Well, great. We're out of time, but thanks so much for coming and joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.